Fantastic, fantastic. I'm glad I didn't trip and fall on my face there. It would have been rather embarrassing. But it's a little bit like David Cameron falling in his face at the moment, hasn't he? Promising to go out for a renegotiation of something fundamental that would change the relationship with Britain and the European Union. And what has he come back with? Absolutely nothing. He's come back with a sense of the newspapers which have shown how embarrassing he is. He's delusional, said the Daily Mail. Well, I think that was the nicest thing that we can possibly say, and I'll deal with that in a moment. And I'm very grateful that you've come here this evening. I do recognise members of UKIP, but can I ask, is there anyone in the audience tonight who is not at the moment minded to vote to leave the European Union, wants to stay in, or is actually on the fence and thinking about it? Well, actually, you're going to make my job very, very easy indeed. So, I think in that case, I can go right away, straight away. This is it. This is our moment. This is what many have been fighting for since 1972. When they recognise that this country, a proud nation, a nation that has fought for generations for freedom and democracy, a nation that has allowed itself to develop a legal framework that ensures that we can have meetings like this very safely and not be worried that there'll be people outside waiting to take us into prison or lock us away for good. A nation that has managed to build a national health service that looks after us, an education service that allows people like myself to have come from a Moss Side working class environment to be a barrister, a member of the European Parliament, and represent people on this stage today. A nation that is a proud, proud people that has welcomed people across the world, both to come to our country as immigrants, but also to accept those who are asylum seekers in genuine need. But a nation that is fed up that the European Union and our own governments are failing us on a daily basis. And part of the reason that they are failing us is because of the membership of the European Union and the way that it constricts them from being able to make decisions on our lives. Let us start with 3 key reasons of why we should leave the European Union. Firstly, as many of us know, our Parliament is a proud Parliament. It's a Parliament that even people like Nelson Mandela, when he was in prison and upon release, he said the greatest democracy in the world is that of the United Kingdom, and the greatest Parliament is that in Westminster. So instead of feeling proud, Mr. Cameron, instead of feeling that sense of history when you went into these negotiations, when you realised that 75% or even more now of our laws are made by unelected dictators who are sitting there, and I use the word dictators, some of them are very nice, trust me, I've met them. Some of them have even invited me for coffee in the chambers of Strasbourg, trying to turn me over as they've turned so many of our politicians over there already. But what we know about them is that behind closed doors there are 3,000 working groups. We don't know in the Commission, because they won't tell us, who are in those working groups. We can try and work it out. But we tend to find out that it's Goldman Sachs and Merrill Lynch and, Morgan Stanley who are working the rules on financial services. We know it's the big corporates who are working the rules on engineering or in terms of pharmaceuticals. It's those big pharmaceutical companies that are trying to squash smaller businesses in Blackburn who are trying to use vapour and e-cigarettes. And we know that they're backed by a commission who are unelected. And these unelected people work behind the closed doors to ensure that they create the rules and regulations that come down onto our country. And they bypass our Parliament very clearly. We have a Parliament that should be very proud that we elect MPs who listen to you and within their party structures makes the laws. But we know they don't do that in the European Parliament. As Chris quite rightly said, and thank you very much for that kind introduction, and Chris for helping organise this, is I've driven 12 hours from Strasbourg to get here. What have we been deciding over the past few months in Strasbourg? 2 weeks ago, I was there in the chamber when they decided to vote for effectively a European army. Do I hear David Cameron renegotiating clauses that we won't be part of a European army? 8 weeks before that, in the very same chamber, the members of the European Parliament voted for Commission's proposals to allow tax deductions for any business that produced weapons for the new European army. They allowed tax deductions for any company that produced drones for the new European army. They allowed tax deductions for any company that was going to provide the ability for the European army to grow. That is what the European Parliament does. That is approving Commission regulations that are seeking ever closer union. And that is one reason why we must leave the European Union. So did David Cameron manage to achieve any real improvement on ever closer union? Do you think he did?
No.
Did we see it in black and white?
No.
Did we see him get down off a plane effectively waving a white piece of paper like someone did 40 years before? Yes, he did. Because the ever closer union that he is talking about requires 55% approval from members of the European Union before any regulation is prevented from entering into our own country. That isn't democracy. That isn't sovereignty. That isn't freedom. And that, damn right, isn't a close renegotiation in the interest of the British people. Shame on Mr. Cameron.
Shame.
So having shown that he was unable and incapable of negotiating bringing our powers back from the European Commission and stopping the European Parliament from having any control on our own, we should be then looking at the second main reason of why we should be leaving the European Union. It is essential for any country to have security of its own nation by having control of its own borders. And Mr. Cameron did not even seek to attempt to regain that control and ensure that we control our own borders, that Parliament controls our own borders, and that we can ensure the safety and security of this nation. And once again, shame on Mr. Cameron for failing to achieve that. Because over the past few weeks, I have done innumerable television and radio interviews discussing two aspects. The asylum seekers that David Cameron has sought to bring into the country, 20,000. And then we asked the question of whether we should bring in 3,000 young children. Now, I have a daughter of my own. She's only 3 years of age. When I saw those pictures of that little child, Ayan, dying on the beach, I put my finger out to any one of us in this room who didn't feel the stir of pain and anger and upset, who didn't feel that we should be reaching out to help those people. And I am one who is proud that this nation has adopted United Nations resolutions that will allow us to have genuine asylum seekers coming to this country. And I think we have that proud history. But the people of this country have now got migration fatigue. They're exhausted of the numbers of people that come to this country because they recognise it is not necessarily about the asylum seekers, it's about the 330,000 people that came last year in net migration, a city the size of Coventry. The year before, it was 320,000, a city the size of York. We've had over 5 million people in 10 years come to this country. We know how difficult it is to go to our doctors and our hospitals. We see the crowded schools. We see the infrastructure creaking around us. And we are saying, it's enough is enough. We're a small island, too dense. It is not about the individual, it's about the numbers of people. And we can only control our borders and have an Australian points-based system that makes sure that we have the people that we want working here, coming here when necessary, if we leave the European Union and take control back of our borders. Mr. Cameron, that's what we want in negotiation, and shame on you for not bringing it back. So he didn't bring back our freedom. He didn't bring back our control of our borders. And nor has he given us the opportunity to control the future of our nation through the jobs and creation of work and ensuring that we have a better future for the children and workers of this country. Because let's be absolutely clear that it's the decisions of the Labour Party and the decisions of the Conservative Party to remain in the European Union and adopt aggressive policies from the European Union on energy that has increased the bills of everyone in this room. In terms of energy, you are now paying as an average family over £400 to £500 a year more in your electricity bills. By our membership of the European Union with the Common Agricultural Policy, where out of our £55 million a day, over a third of that is subsidising farmers across Europe. But the consequence is, for the family basket, it costs you £933 a year more in your food basket. When we have people coming to food banks, when we have families struggling to make ends meet, does it make sense for us to be in a European Union that costs us £933 more a year in our food and £500 more a year in our energy baskets? I say no, we must leave the European Union to bring policies that make our governments work for the people and not the people work for the politicians. And if we didn't have those policies brought down from the European Union, take a look at the factories of the steel factories in Wales, or indeed those in the northeast. They talk about China as though it's China's fault for dumping cheap steel on the United Kingdom and other parts of Europe. But when you look at those steel companies, when you talk to those managers, when you ask them what the biggest costs for them, almost 50% of the costs, sometimes more, sometimes slightly less, is down to energy. And the energy costs they're having to pay higher energy bills because we are subsidising wind farms, subsidising solar panels, and subsidising crackpot European Union ideas on how we deal with energy in a country like this. We say that if you want to keep jobs in Wales, if you want to keep the steel factories open in the north of England, if you want to have our oil and gas businesses working, then you mustn't be listening to the European Union rules that work for their companies in perhaps France and Germany, but don't have our own workers' interests at heart. If you want to keep your jobs here, then we have to leave the European Union and make the laws that apply to our own people first. But it isn't only about the facts of things that are already bad, whether it's on immigration, whether it's on the economy, whether it's on the jobs, whether it's in your food basket, whether it's in your energy basket. This referendum isn't about the status quo. Because, trust me, if we lose this referendum, which I believe we won't, but if we lose this referendum, do you think for 1 minute Jean-Claude Juncker, the President of the Commission, Mr. Schulz, the President of the Parliament, and Tusk, the President of the Council, will be sitting there going, that's okay, we'll leave Britain alone now. We won't move to ever closer union. We won't start to implement the idea of the United States of Europe that is the dream of so many federalists. I've already mentioned to you this night some of the things in relation to the European Army. They will press forward with the European Army. We already know that they're seeking to have the banking union, which will ensure that the European Central Bank is the only main bank in Europe to control the euro and the economy. David Cameron is seeking to have ourselves outside of the Eurozone, protected, he says, by a written document that will be lodged at the United Nations. He said today that it's this government that will never seek to have that back. Well, what if there is another government? What, goodness forbid, if there was a Labour government under Corbyn or others like him, Chuka Umaga, Liz Kendall, all those who live in wonderful places in London in their £1 million houses? You couldn't see them any further from the Labour Party or the people that they seek to represent, could you? But you know that they are avid Europhiles, that given the power, they would seek to bring ever closer union from the Labour Party, just as Blair tried to do himself. The only time I've ever believed that Gordon Brown did anything right was keeping us out of the euro. But there is a danger that they could do it. So they could bring us further closer to the European Union, into the Eurozone and banking union. They talk about a capital markets union, which would be controlled from the European Union. You're lending for mortgages, you're lending for your credit cards, you're lending in your loans, controlled by the European Central Bank and the Commission. And there are other dangers too. I sit on the Economic and Monetary Affairs Committee, and at the moment they're plotting a central corporation tax run by the European Union. They only withdrew after pressure from ourselves, from announcing it to the public, of wanting to change the VAT rules to remove the exemptions that Britain has on food and clothing for children. They will want to put VAT on food as we've got now. And more than anything else, because of their negotiation that Britain is excluded from doing in our own free trade arrangements, which we would have back if we left, they will implement the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership Agreement. Now, if none of you in this room understand what TTIP is, then that's its name. TTIP will give the ability for large corporations, whether in the United States or affiliates of theirs, to be able to sue the government, the councils, or indeed the National Health Service if they oppose contracts or dealings with the National Health Service. They could even sue it if they don't get privatisation of servant services. The NHS is vital for this country. It must be preserved, it must be protected, and we have to leave the European Union, otherwise they will leave it in danger from the Americans through the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership Agreement. That is a reason. Protect our NHS, leave the European Union. But there's something far more important in many ways to me. Perhaps it was because I saw the impact of my grandfather as he sometimes sat in the Green End pub with his pint on his own, probably reminiscing of what he had to face in the Second World War to enable me to stand here today. Freedom, liberty, justice. It rolls off the tongue so easily, doesn't it? Sometimes so much we don't even remember what it means. But as Ronald Reagan once said, freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction. We didn't pass it on to our children in a bloodstream. It must be fought for. It must be preserved and handed down to them the same. A few hundred miles down the motorway as I was travelling up tonight, passing it, there's a little village called Burford. Burford's important to me, and I don't know if any of you know what Burford is. But there were 3 names on a plaque on a church in Burford. 3 names from 3 individuals that believed in freedom. Corporal Thompson, Corporal Jenkins, and John Bursnell. 3 men who fought in the New Model Army. The New Model Army that fought the King, Charles I, because they believed that it was time that a dictator, an elitist king, shouldn't control their lives. But they had something much more radical about their lives. They believed and started writing and working with the pamphleteers, the Levellers. And the Levellers had a dream, a simple dream, an idea called democracy. The opportunity for individuals to put a cross on 400 people who would represent them around the country, a parliament. Who believed that you should have habeas corpus and never be arrested simply because someone rich wanted to charge you and take away your land or prevent you from complaining. We want to have trial by jury by, in those days, 12 men, good and true, and thankfully now of 12 good men and women, true. But they set off something that has trickled through our history. The ideas of democracy and freedom that runs through our common law system, our Christian Judeo culture, that has enabled ourselves to develop where we are today. But even then, even in that town of Burford, having worked for Cromwell and got rid of the king, those ideas were called heretical by Cromwell himself. And he demanded at that church that those three men and all their supporters come out one by one and renounce the heretical ideas of freedom. Well, every one of them did, one by one. They walked out of the church and they said, I don't believe in freedom. I can almost see the cabinet ministers in David Cameron's cabinet at the moment saying, yes, once I was a Eurosceptic, but now I prefer to be a member of the House of Lords in 10 years' time, or perhaps you're going to give me that non-governmental organisation when I retire, and I will put my position before the people. But those three men didn't. And for that, Cromwell killed them on the spot. They died for us. And I joined UKIP because of people like them. Because people stood up because they believed every man and woman had the right to freedom. They stood up because they believed every man and the woman had the right to vote. They stood up because they believed that this nation could be the greatest nation where, irrespective of your creed, your colour, your race, your religion, you can move freely in this nation. And in standing up, they set down the principles that make this nation the nation that we believe in today. As I say, parliamentary democracy, habeas corpus, trial by jury, the right to know your accuser. Great people in this country like Wellington and Nelson and Elizabeth I, of Churchill, all who understand the powers of nations' beliefs and the values that we must defend. And people like my grandfather, who believed it was the right for his family to live freely in this nation and not under the nation of a European dictator seeking to control every aspect of our lives. So that is why we are standing at a moment in history. And you are part of that history. Your families will be part of that history. This time will be written like the Chartists, like the suffragettes who were beaten outside our own parliament simply for asking for the vote. You will be like those three men who defended the rights of democracy against all the attacks that will come from those who are anti-democratic. This is our time to register our belief that there is something bigger than us, something greater than simply standing outside and doing a job, but looking into the eyes of our children and our grandchildren and saying, I was there, I stood up to be counted, I believed in freedom and democracy, and I believe that this is the greatest nation that can achieve that freedom and democracy, not a European Council, not a European Commission, not a European members of Parliament like mine. You want to get rid of them and have freedom in this country. You have that chance through this referendum. So I want you to get out, tweet, Facebook, knock on doors, talk to your friends. Make sure this is not party political. Make sure that everybody understands it's our time. It's our time to be free. And you've got to believe in it, because I believe in you and this people and this country. Thank you very much.
Stephen's very kindly offered to take a couple of questions from the audience.
I'm sorry I can't.
Something on their mind.
Yeah, I'm sorry I can't stay longer. In Manchester tonight, there is a coming together of politicians from all political parties. You have Nigel Farage in Manchester standing alongside Kate Hoey of the Labour Party, Peter Bone from the Conservative Party, Mark Denny from the trade unions, the RMT, and Simon Heffer. And today they'll be announcing also that David Davis, who once ran for the leadership of the Conservative Party, will also be on that platform, because there are people from all parties who believe this nation will be great again outside of the European Union and are putting party politics aside. So I'm going to rush from here to be over there, so I apologise for that. But I can take two questions, because I know that there is some who wanted it, and I might be able to elucidate. Questions often get better to the detail.
If I could ask you a very simple question.
Yes, sir.
We all know why we want to leave the European Union. That's why we're here. But when I talk to my relatives, young and older than myself, most of them are ignorant. They express ignorance of the reasons why we should remain in or leave. And the message is just not getting out to those people at the moment. You know, the arguments that you put forward, which we all understand, are not out in the mainstream of the media at the moment. How do we get that message across? across in my question.
I think places like this is a good start. I think what we did over the last weekend, where we put 30 stalls up and down the Northwest in the streets, where we're doing a ground campaign. And I think what's happening tonight with the Go campaign, which is the grassroots out campaign that's in Manchester, it had 2,500 people in Kettering a week or so ago as well. The coming together of politicians on all parties now that are deciding that they've got to get their voice out. And the unification that might occur between the two camps that are seeking to leave, vote leave and leave.eu, that is happening. And once that campaign comes together, the message comes out. But I would say there are 4 key words. It's prosperity, it's for the nation's security, it's the protection of our culture, and it's to ensure our freedom. And those are the 3 crucial words that we should be using and explaining to people of why leaving the European Union is a very positive thing. I believe that there will actually be a kind of engineering and business and energetic revolution within the people, because freed of the arguments that we've been having for so long. The understanding that now that this government can enter free trade arrangements with rising nations like Ghana and Nigeria on our own terms, the fact that we can then seek our own free trade arrangements with America and Canada and other countries where we haven't got them now, where we've got the ability to transform our regulations so that companies that want to trade in Europe still have to abide by European regulations, but those that don't can then manufacture and structure their businesses to compete in South America or in Australasia or in China much more easily, where we can actually start looking at things that impact our nation more importantly, protect our currency, protect our interest rates, protect our NHS, and enable ourselves to get out across the world, because we've got to be outwardly looking, we have to be globally trading. I often say, I'm English by birth, I'm British by nationality, but I'm global in outlook, and I believe Britain is like that, but we've been held back for so long that this will be just like a bubble releasing and we'll be out there energetic. That's the message, the positive message, that I believe that we'll be a better country for it. So there was a question over there, I hope that helps some way.
Yeah, seriously.
Sorry, sir.
Can I ask what's your view about the role and the justification for fracking as part of energy policy, please? I mean, I've done quite a bit of research into looking into the justification for it. And Northwich is one of the areas where there is great possibilities. Northwich and
Look, I'm sure that there are those who believe in fracking and those who don't. But the most important thing that I look at is not whether there are justifications or non-justifications. It's the decision whether we should allow the European Union to make the decision of whether we should frack or not frack in this country. What I believe is that whether you believe in fracking, and I know that there are those in this room who don't believe in fracking, should be able to argue with politicians in this country who make those decisions. And that's what I would like to see. That's the democracy. It's what Tony Benn used to say. There are 5 key things you've got to ask him. Who are you? Where did you get your power from? How do you get it? How do you have it? How can we get rid of you if we don't like you? And that's what I would like to seek to achieve.
But that's not answering my question.
No, because I'm not going to go into the rights and wrongs of fracking, because that in itself is a different issue, not necessarily connected to whether we stay in the European Union or not. The decision-making who does so is, but I believe that the arguments about fracking, like many of the issues, should we have, increased taxation or decreased taxation? Should we be subsidising businesses? Should we be taking back national rail into privatisation, or should we be bringing it back into national control? These are all issues that could come from the government, backed by yourselves. And I've had to discuss all of them, then we wouldn't have time. But this is about the European Union and whether we should have control of those issues. I'll take one more, Chris, and then
Anyone have the final question?
Yeah, why have we not
well, there was
got...
that lady over there. Sorry, sir. I've asked 2 men, and being fair. Otherwise, my wife and my mum would tell me off. So, did you have a question, man? No. All right. Well, sorry. I will take you, sir. After.
Why haven't we got brochures here tonight that we can put through letterboxes?
Well, I'm sure there are brochures and details at the back. I think you've got a lady who's coming on to speak, Caroline, who's going to set out the campaign. Chris and Chris here will have some details about that. I think that's a matter for them. So they'll be able to...
5,000.
I got 5,000 with your name written on it, by the way, and none of that's a lottery ticket, trust me on that. Right. Well, Chris, I have to go, I'm afraid. I'm sorry, ladies and gentlemen, that I couldn't say that.